What if having children is the most selfish thing you can ever do? This might sound strange and controversial, but it's a foundation of a philosophy called Antinatalism. To understand, let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine you hold a magical key. This key has the power to bring someone into existence, a brand new person who will experience life in all its glory and its suffering. But here's the catch. The life you create will come with no guarantees. It might be filled with joy and wonder, or it might be marked by unbearable pain and despair. The person you create has no say in whether they want to exist. The decision is entirely yours. Would you turn the key? This question lies at the heart of antinatalism, a philosophy that argues against creating new life. One of its most prominent thinkers, David Benatar, offers a thought-provoking rationale in his book, Better Never to Have Been. He introduces the idea of an asymmetry in existence. If someone isn't born, they don't experience pain, which is good. They also don't experience happiness, but since they don't exist, they don't miss it. On the other hand, if someone is born, they inevitably suffer, even if they also experience joy. Benatar argues that the avoidance of harm outweighs the potential benefits of pleasure. In his view, the act of creating life is fundamentally unjust because it imposes suffering on someone who had no choice in the matter. But antinatalism isn't just about philosophical puzzles. It's also rooted in the harsh realities of the world we live in. Think about the countless forms of suffering that exist: poverty, illness, war, and environmental collapse. Even in the most privileged lives, there's heartbreak, anxiety, and the inescapable fear of death. Every new life created is another being thrust into this unpredictable and often cruel theater. Some antinatalists argue that in a world where suffering is so pervasive, bringing a new person into existence is an act of willful ignorance or selfishness. The philosophy also intersects with ethical questions about our responsibility to others. Philosopher Julio Cabrera, another influential voice in antinatalism, takes a moral approach. He argues that procreation violates the principles of ethical behavior. According to Cabrera, the act of creating life disregards the consent of the person being born. It imposes risks and burdens without their agreement, making procreation a morally questionable act. Cabrera goes further, suggesting that bringing a child into the world is not an act of love, but an act of power, a decision made unilaterally by the parent. Beyond individual suffering, antinatalism also addresses the collective impact of human existence. Environmental thinkers like Les Knight, founder of the Voluntary human extinction movement, argue that ceasing human reproduction could be a compassionate choice, not just for humans, but for the planet itself. Knight's perspective is rooted in the undeniable fact that human activity has caused immense harm to the Earth. From deforestation to climate change, the ecological cost of humanity is staggering. Antinatalists like Knight see a world without humans not as a tragedy, but as a return to balance, a world where nature can thrive without the destructive presence of our species. But what about the joys of life? The laughter of children, the warmth of love, the thrill of discovery. Don't these make existence worthwhile? Antinatalists would counter that these joys are fleeting, and they are often outweighed by the inescapable pain that life brings. For every moment of happiness, there is the shadow of loss, the weight of uncertainty, and the inevitability of suffering. Even those who find meaning in their lives must confront the harsh truth that their existence will one day end, often in pain or fear. To antinatalists, the beauty of life does not erase its inherent cruelty. Critics of antinatalism often accuse it of being too pessimistic, even nihilistic. But many antinatalists would disagree. They argue that their philosophy is not about hating life or despairing over existence. Instead, it's about compassion. It's about recognizing the immense burden of life and choosing not to impose it on another being. In this sense, antinatalism is not a rejection of humanity, but a profound act of empathy. Let's return to that magical key. Would you use it, knowing the risks? Would you invite someone into a world where suffering is certain, even if happiness is possible? Or would you choose to leave the key untouched, sparing them the pain and uncertainty of existence? Antinatalism doesn't demand an answer, it only asks us to consider the question. And in doing so, it challenges one of the most fundamental assumptions of human life, that creating new life is always a good thing. Efilism. Life is a mistake, not just human life, but all life. The predator hunting its prey, the insect devoured by a larger beast, the endless cycle of birth, suffering, and death. Efilism, a radical philosophy, doesn't just question human existence. It questions the very fabric of life itself. It asks us to consider an unsettling idea. What if the kindest, most ethical act isn't to sustain life, but to end it? Imagine a factory that's been running for billions of years. It churns out living beings endlessly, each one programmed to fight for survival, experience suffering, and inevitably die. This factory isn't guided by intelligence or purpose. It runs blindly, its only goal being the replication of DNA. This is the process of evolution, the engine of life. Efilists argue that this machine is fundamentally broken, and worse, it is cruel. Life, they claim, is a mindless system that perpetuates suffering for no higher reason. To understand this, let's look at nature. Picture a lion chasing a zebra. To survive, the lion must kill and eat the zebra. The zebra, desperate to live, flees in terror. But neither animal chose this game. The lion hunts out of hunger, and the zebra runs out of fear. The suffering of one is the survival of the other. Nature's so-called balance is, at its core, a bloodbath. Efilists see this as not just a tragedy, but as evidence that life itself is inherently flawed. But Efilism doesn't stop at the natural world. It applies its critique to human life as well. Think about your daily existence. Even in the best circumstances, we are burdened by the inevitabilities of aging, illness, and death. Our joys are fleeting, and our struggles are unending. For every moment of happiness, there are countless moments of frustration, loss, and despair. And this isn't just true for humans. Every sentient being, from the smallest insect to the largest mammal, is caught in the same trap. Efilism's argument is simple, yet profound. Evolution, the process that brought life into existence, doesn't care about the well-being of the creatures it creates. Its only purpose is to ensure survival and reproduction, no matter the cost. In this sense, life is not a miracle or a gift. It is a relentless cycle of need, pain, and eventual death. Efilists believe that continuing this cycle is not just pointless, but ethically wrong. Now imagine you're holding a switch. If you flip it, all life in the universe would painlessly cease to exist. No more suffering, no more fear, no more endless struggle. Would you do it? This thought experiment captures the essence of Efilism. It is not a philosophy born of hatred for life, but of compassion for all living beings trapped in its cycle. Efilists argue that true kindness lies in ending suffering altogether, even if that means extinguishing life itself. Critics of Efilism often label it as extreme or nihilistic. But Efilists counter that their perspective is rooted in logic and empathy. They ask, if you wouldn't willingly subject someone to endless pain and hardship, why would you allow the continuation of a system that guarantees suffering for countless beings? For Efilists, the solution is clear: to stop the factory, to end the machine, to bring life's cruel experiment to a close. It's a perspective that shocks, provokes, and challenges the very foundations of how we view existence. Efilism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting truths. Instead, it forces us to confront life's harshest realities and ask ourselves an impossible question. Is existence worth the cost? Negative utilitarianism. Imagine a world where the ultimate moral goal is not to maximize happiness, but to minimize suffering. This is the foundation of negative utilitarianism, a striking and controversial ethical framework. Unlike traditional utilitarianism, which focuses on increasing the overall amount of happiness, negative utilitarianism zeroes in on suffering as the central moral issue, arguing that the reduction or elimination of pain should take precedence over the pursuit of pleasure. The roots of negative utilitarianism lie in the recognition that suffering is uniquely powerful. While happiness can enhance life, suffering often imposes a much deeper and more urgent moral demand. A moment of pleasure might be fleeting, but pain, whether physical or emotional, can dominate a person's existence. The philosopher Karl Popper, one of the early proponents of this view, argued that the avoidance of misery and suffering should take priority over increasing happiness because alleviating pain directly improves the quality of life for those who are suffering. Negative utilitarianism challenges us to think critically about the value we place on happiness versus the importance of alleviating pain. In many situations, focusing on reducing suffering seems straightforward and intuitive. Providing food and shelter to those in need, offering medical care to the sick, or addressing mental health crises are clear examples of actions that align with this framework. These interventions directly alleviate suffering and improve well-being. But negative utilitarianism extends beyond individual cases and asks us to think on a broader, even existential scale. One of the more controversial aspects of negative utilitarianism is the implication that, if suffering outweighs happiness in the world, drastic actions might be morally justified to prevent further suffering. For instance, some interpretations suggest that if life itself inevitably brings suffering, the moral thing to do might be to prevent future lives from coming into existence. This idea aligns with antinatalist philosophies, which argue against procreation on the grounds that it prevents potential suffering. Such arguments force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of existence and the ethics of creating life in a world where pain is unavoidable. Critics of negative utilitarianism often highlight its potential for extreme conclusions. They argue that an obsessive focus on eliminating suffering could lead to moral decisions that overlook the value of happiness, joy, and fulfillment. For example, if one takes the logic of negative utilitarianism to its extreme, it might justify actions that eliminate all sentient life to prevent future suffering, a scenario that raises serious ethical and practical concerns. While most negative utilitarians reject such drastic interpretations, the possibility reveals the tension inherent in the philosophy. Another challenge for negative utilitarianism lies in the complexity of measuring suffering. Pain is subjective and varies greatly among individuals and contexts. What one person finds unbearable, another might endure with relative ease. This variability complicates efforts to apply negative utilitarianism consistently, especially on a societal level. How do we weigh the suffering of different individuals or groups? How do we balance immediate pain against the potential for long-term well-being? Despite these challenges, negative utilitarianism offers valuable insights into ethical decision-making. It pushes us to prioritize the reduction of suffering in situations where resources are limited and difficult choices must be made. In global health, for instance, this framework can guide policies that focus on treating the most severe illnesses or alleviating the most pressing hardships. By centering suffering, negative utilitarianism ensures that the most urgent needs are addressed first, providing a clear moral imperative to help those in the greatest distress. Negative utilitarianism also invites us to rethink our relationship with suffering on a personal level. It challenges the cultural narratives that glorify suffering as a path to growth or achievement, instead emphasizing the moral importance of compassion and care. By recognizing the weight of suffering, we can develop a greater sense of empathy and responsibility toward others, striving to create a world where unnecessary pain is minimized. Ultimately, negative utilitarianism is not about denying the value of happiness, but about recognizing the profound moral urgency of suffering. It calls us to confront the darker aspects of existence with honesty and resolve, reminding us that even small acts of kindness and care can make a significant difference. While the philosophy may raise difficult questions and invite criticism, it also highlights a truth that resonates deeply. Alleviating suffering is a fundamental and deeply human goal, one that transcends cultural and philosophical divides. It asks us not to abandon the pursuit of happiness, but to ensure that, in that pursuit, we do not lose sight of those who are suffering the most. Voluntary human extinction movement. Picture a world without humans, no pollution, no deforestation, no species driven to extinction by human activity. This is the vision of the voluntary human extinction movement, a provocative and deeply controversial ideology that proposes a simple but radical solution to humanity's environmental impact. That humans should voluntarily stop reproducing and allow our species to fade into extinction for the benefit of the planet and all other forms of life. The voluntary human extinction movement is not about hatred of humanity or advocating harm. At its core, it is rooted in compassion for the planet, for future generations, and for the countless species whose existence is threatened by human activity. Its founder, Les Knight, articulated the movement's philosophy as one of voluntary action. He argues that humanity's dominance over the earth has caused unparalleled harm, and the most ethical response is to step aside, allowing the natural world to heal and thrive without us. The movement asks us to confront uncomfortable truths about humanity's impact. As a species, we have reshaped ecosystems, altered the climate, and driven countless species to extinction. Every year, vast tracts of forests are cleared for agriculture, oceans are polluted with plastic, and the atmosphere is filled with greenhouse gases. The voluntary human extinction movement suggests that these issues are not just byproducts of mismanagement or inefficiency, but inherent to the existence of a species as dominant and resource-intensive as humanity. Supporters of the movement argue that even the most sustainable human practices come at a cost to other life forms. While efforts to reduce our footprint through renewable energy, conservation, and sustainable agriculture are vital, they contend that these measures are insufficient to address the deeper issue, humanity's sheer scale and consumption. For them, voluntary extinction is not a statement of despair, but an act of altruism, a way to prioritize the needs of the planet over the perpetuation of a single species. Critics of the voluntary human extinction movement raise several objections. One of the most common is that it dismisses humanity's capacity for positive change. Humans, after all, are not only destructive, but also creative and compassionate. We have developed technologies that can restore damaged ecosystems, discovered ways to mitigate climate change, and advocated for the rights of other species. Critics argue that instead of disappearing, humanity should focus on becoming better stewards of the earth, finding ways to coexist harmoniously with other life forms. Another critique is the philosophical question of whether extinction is inherently better for the planet. Without humans, the natural world would undoubtedly recover, but the cycle of life would still involve suffering. Predation, disease, and competition are fundamental aspects of ecosystems. The absence of humans might alleviate certain pressures, but it would not eliminate pain and struggle from the natural world. The movement also sparks ethical questions about how humanity values itself. Is it possible to promote voluntary extinction without diminishing the inherent worth of human life? Supporters of the movement believe it is, emphasizing that their philosophy is not about misanthropy or self-hatred, but about recognizing humanity's unique position of responsibility. By choosing not to reproduce, they argue, we acknowledge the power we hold over the planet and make a conscious decision to reduce harm. The voluntary human extinction movement forces us to think deeply about the nature of progress and our place in the world. It challenges the assumption that growth, whether economic, technological, or population-based, is inherently good. Instead, it asks whether true progress might lie in restraint, in stepping back to allow other forms of life to flourish. This perspective shifts the focus from human-centric narratives of achievement to a broader view of the planet as a shared home. While the movement's ultimate goal may seem extreme or unrealistic, its underlying message resonates with many who are concerned about the state of the environment. It highlights the urgency of addressing humanity's impact and sparks important conversations about sustainability, ethics, and the future of life on Earth. Whether or not one agrees with the idea of voluntary extinction, the movement serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of unchecked human activity and the moral responsibility that comes with being the dominant species. The voluntary human extinction movement does not seek to impose its philosophy on others. Instead, it invites reflection on the long-term implications of our choices as individuals and as a species. In doing so, it challenges us to confront not only the environmental crisis, but also the values and assumptions that shape how we live. The idea may be unsettling, but its purpose is to provoke thought, encouraging us to imagine a world where humanity's legacy is one of compassion, not destruction. Whether humanity chooses to adapt, change, or fade away, the questions raised by the voluntary human extinction movement will remain relevant as we navigate the complex relationship between progress and preservation. The repugnant conclusion. What if a world filled with billions of people living lives barely worth living is considered morally better than a smaller world where everyone experiences true happiness? This is the unsettling paradox known as the repugnant conclusion, a concept introduced by philosopher Derek Parfit in his book Reasons and Persons. It challenges our deepest intuitions about what makes a world morally good and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the way we think about happiness, population, and ethics. The repugnant conclusion emerges from a specific line of reasoning in utilitarian population ethics, which focuses on maximizing total happiness. Imagine a society with a small population of people who all live exceptionally good lives. Now consider adding more people to that society, each with a life that is less fulfilling but still worth living. As the population grows, the average quality of life decreases, but the total amount of happiness increases because more people are experiencing positive lives. If this logic is carried to its extreme, we end up with a world where billions of people live lives of minimal happiness. And yet this world is considered morally better because the total happiness outweighs the lower quality of individual lives. This conclusion is deeply counterintuitive. It seems absurd to suggest that a world where everyone is barely surviving could be better than one filled with deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives. Yet, under a strict utilitarian framework that prioritizes total happiness, this is the outcome. The repugnant conclusion forces us to question whether our moral instincts align with our philosophical principles. One reason the repugnant conclusion feels so troubling is that it reduces lives to numbers. By focusing on the total sum of happiness, it treats people as interchangeable units of value rather than unique individuals with rich, complex experiences. This abstraction ignores the depth and diversity of human life, raising questions about whether happiness can truly be measured in such a simplistic way. Can the joy of a deeply fulfilling life be equated to the shallow contentment of many lives barely worth living? Philosophers have offered various responses to the repugnant conclusion. Some argue that the problem lies with utilitarianism itself. By focusing solely on maximizing happiness, utilitarianism fails to account for other values, such as fairness, dignity, or the importance of individual flourishing. These critics suggest that we need a more nuanced ethical framework that balances the quantity of happiness with its quality. Others, like Parfit himself, have explored alternative approaches to population ethics. One proposal is the average utility principle, which prioritizes the average level of happiness in a society rather than the total amount. Under this principle, a smaller population with higher average happiness would be considered better than a larger population with lower average happiness. While this approach avoids the repugnant conclusion, it introduces its own set of problems. For example, it might justify actions that reduce the number of people in a society to artificially raise the average happiness, even if doing so causes harm. Another response to the repugnant conclusion is to question whether adding new people to the world has moral value at all. Some philosophers argue that morality should focus on improving the lives of existing individuals rather than creating new ones. This perspective challenges the assumption that bringing more people into existence automatically adds value to the world. It suggests that what matters is not how many people are happy, but how well those who already exist are able to live. The repugnant conclusion also has implications for real-world decisions about population and resources. For example, in discussions about global development, policymakers often face trade-offs between improving the quality of life for a smaller number of people and providing basic needs for a larger population. The logic of the repugnant conclusion could be used to justify prioritizing sheer numbers, even if it results in widespread mediocrity. This raises ethical questions about how we balance the well-being of current and future generations. Parfit's work on the repugnant conclusion has influenced a wide range of philosophical debates, from the ethics of procreation to the moral responsibilities of governments and international organizations. It challenges us to think critically about the values we prioritize and the assumptions underlying our moral reasoning. Is happiness an objective measure of a good life, or is it too simplistic to capture the complexities of human experience? How do we weigh the needs of individuals against the needs of the collective? And what responsibilities do we have to those who do not yet exist? At its core, the repugnant conclusion is not just a paradox, but a mirror that reflects the inconsistencies in our moral thinking. It forces us to confront the tension between our intuitive judgments and the implications of our ethical theories. By grappling with this paradox, we gain a deeper understanding of the challenges and limitations of moral philosophy, and we are reminded that the pursuit of a better world often raises more questions than answers. The problem of suffering. Why does suffering exist? If we live in a world capable of producing beauty, joy, and love, why is it also filled with pain, loss, and cruelty? This question, known as the problem of suffering, has haunted humanity for centuries. It challenges our understanding of existence, morality, and even the nature of the universe itself. At its core, the problem of suffering is not just about why suffering occurs, but what it means and how we should respond to it. Suffering takes many forms, from the physical pain of injury to the emotional anguish of heartbreak or loss. It is an undeniable part of the human condition, woven into the fabric of existence. But what makes suffering so perplexing is its universality. No one is exempt from it. Whether rich or poor, powerful or powerless, every sentient being experiences suffering in some form. This shared reality raises profound questions. Is suffering necessary? Is it random? Or is there a deeper purpose behind it? Philosophers and thinkers have approached the problem of suffering in different ways. For those who believe in a higher power, suffering poses a theological challenge. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why does He allow suffering to exist? This question, often referred to as the problem of evil, has led to centuries of debate. Some argue that suffering is a test of faith or a tool for spiritual growth. Others suggest it is a consequence of human free will, a necessary byproduct of our ability to choose. Yet these answers often feel incomplete. They might explain some instances of suffering, but fall short when faced with the sheer scale of pain in the world, natural disasters, disease, and tragedies that seem to strike without reason. Secular perspectives on suffering often focus on its biological and evolutionary roots. Pain, for instance, serves an important function in alerting organisms to danger. Without the ability to feel pain, a person might not withdraw their hand from a fire or recognize the symptoms of an illness. Emotional suffering, too, has its roots in survival. Fear keeps us safe from threats, while grief helps us process loss and move forward. From this perspective, suffering is not a cosmic punishment or moral failing, but a necessary part of life's design. Yet, understanding the purpose of suffering doesn't make it any easier to endure. It still leaves us questioning why life must be built on such a fragile foundation. Existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre viewed suffering as an inevitable part of life, one that challenges us to find meaning in an indifferent universe. Nietzsche famously said, "To live is to suffer. To survive is to find some meaning in the suffering." For him, suffering was not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced and overcome, a crucible through which we forge strength and purpose. Sartre, on the other hand, saw suffering as a consequence of human freedom. Our ability to make choices, to hope and dream, inevitably exposes us to disappointment and despair. In this view, suffering is inseparable from the human experience. It is the price we pay for the richness of life. Another approach to the problem of suffering comes from Buddhist philosophy, which places suffering at the center of its teachings. The Buddha identified suffering, or dukkha, as the first of the Four Noble Truths. According to Buddhism, suffering arises from desire and attachment, our cravings for pleasure, permanence, and control. These desires are in conflict with the impermanent and ever-changing nature of reality, leading to frustration and pain. The Buddhist path offers a way to reduce suffering through mindfulness, ethical living, and the cultivation of wisdom. While it doesn't eliminate all pain, it provides tools for understanding and managing it, offering a path to inner peace. Modern psychology also sheds light on the problem of suffering, exploring how our minds interpret and amplify pain. Research shows that much of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. For example, losing a job is undeniably difficult, but the suffering is often compounded by thoughts like, "I'm a failure," or "I'll never succeed." Cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness practices aim to break these patterns, helping individuals reframe their experiences and reduce the emotional toll of suffering. In recent years, the problem of suffering has taken on new dimensions with the rise of artificial intelligence and transhumanism. Some thinkers argue that suffering could one day be eliminated through technology, whether by re-engineering the human brain or creating digital environments free of pain. While this vision raises ethical and philosophical questions, it also challenges the assumption that suffering is an inevitable part of life. If we could eliminate suffering, should we? Or does suffering serve a deeper purpose that we would lose in the process? Ultimately, the problem of suffering is not just an intellectual puzzle. It is a deeply personal question. Each of us confronts suffering in our own lives, grappling with its meaning and impact. Some find solace in faith or philosophy, others in the support of loved ones or the pursuit of justice. What unites us is the shared experience of wrestling with pain, the search for meaning in hardship, and the hope for something better. Suffering is a paradox. It is both universal and deeply individual, both necessary and unbearable. It reveals the fragility of life, but also its resilience. While we may never fully solve the problem of suffering, the ways we confront it shape who we are and how we live. Perhaps the greatest lesson of suffering is its ability to connect us, to remind us of our shared humanity, and to inspire compassion, courage, and the relentless pursuit of understanding. Quietism? What if the best way to solve the problems of life is to stop trying to solve them altogether? This is the provocative idea at the heart of Quietism, a philosophy that encourages us to let go of the struggle for answers and accept life as it is. Quietism isn't about resignation or defeat. It's about stepping back from the endless noise of human ambition and finding peace in simplicity and stillness. To understand Quietism, imagine a person standing in a river, fighting against the current. They expend all their energy struggling to move forward, only to stay in the same place or be swept backward. Quietism suggests that instead of resisting the flow of the river, we should surrender to it, allowing ourselves to be carried along. This doesn't mean giving up. It means recognizing the futility of certain struggles and choosing a path of harmony instead. The origins of Quietism can be traced to various philosophical and spiritual traditions. In Western philosophy, it is often associated with figures like Pyrrho, the ancient Greek philosopher who founded skepticism. Pyrrho believed that certainty about life's big questions is impossible, and that striving for such certainty only leads to anxiety and frustration. His solution was to embrace a state of suspension, where one refrains from making definitive judgments and instead approaches life with equanimity and openness. For Pyrrho, this state of detachment was the key to achieving inner peace. In early modern Europe, Quietism took on a spiritual dimension with the work of thinkers like Miguel de Molinos, a Spanish priest who advocated for a contemplative life focused on surrender to the divine. Molinos argued that the soul finds true peace not through effort or action, but through complete stillness and trust in God. This version of Quietism emphasized the futility of human striving in the face of divine will and called for a radical acceptance of life's circumstances. Quietism is not limited to Western traditions. In many ways, it resonates with Eastern philosophies such as Taoism and Zen Buddhism. The Taoist concept of wu-wei, or effortless action, aligns closely with the Quietist idea of non-striving. Similarly, Zen teachings often emphasize the importance of letting go of attachment and embracing the present moment as it is. While these traditions have distinct cultural and historical contexts, they share a common thread: the belief that peace comes not from control or achievement, but from surrender and acceptance. One of the central challenges of Quietism is its apparent passivity. Critics argue that it can be an excuse for inaction or a way to avoid responsibility. If we simply accept life as it is, aren't we turning a blind eye to suffering and injustice? Quietists would counter that their philosophy is not about indifference, but about perspective. They suggest that much of our suffering comes not from the world itself, but from our attempts to impose our will on it. By stepping back, we can see things more clearly and act with wisdom and compassion, rather than being driven by ego or desperation. In the realm of philosophy, Ludwig Wittgenstein's later work reflects a Quietist approach. Wittgenstein argued that many philosophical problems arise from the misuse of language, and that once we understand this, the problems dissolve on their own. He famously wrote, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent." For Wittgenstein, the role of philosophy was not to provide solutions, but to show the limits of our understanding and help us find peace within those limits. Quietism also has implications for how we approach personal and societal challenges. In a world obsessed with productivity, progress, and self-improvement, Quietism offers a countercultural perspective. It invites us to question whether our relentless pursuit of more success, more knowledge, more control, is truly making us happier, or whether it is simply creating more stress and dissatisfaction. By stepping back from the constant cycle of striving, we may discover a deeper sense of contentment and clarity. Despite its emphasis on stillness and acceptance, Quietism is not a one-size-fits-all philosophy. It requires careful reflection and balance. For some, it may be a way to navigate the existential uncertainties of life. For others, it may serve as a reminder to slow down and focus on what truly matters. In either case, Quietism challenges us to rethink our relationship with action and inaction, with control and surrender. Ultimately, Quietism is a philosophy of simplicity. It doesn't promise easy answers or quick fixes. Instead, it offers a profound shift in perspective, a way to find peace not by changing the world, but by changing how we engage with it. In a noisy and chaotic world, Quietism invites us to embrace silence, stillness, and the quiet power of letting go. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound truths are found not in striving for more, but in learning to be content with less. Existential Nihilism. Life has no inherent meaning. The universe doesn't care about us, and everything we strive for, success, love, knowledge, eventually dissolves into nothingness. This is the stark reality at the core of existential nihilism, a philosophy that strips away comforting illusions and asks us to face existence as it truly is. For many, this realization feels like staring into an abyss where purpose and value crumble under the weight of indifference. Existential nihilism gained prominence through the works of 19th-century thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche, Søren Kierkegaard, and Fyodor Dostoevsky. Nietzsche, in particular, saw the collapse of traditional religious and moral structures as a profound turning point for humanity. With the death of God, society lost the unifying framework that gave life coherence and purpose for centuries. Without a divine plan or higher authority, Nietzsche argued, humanity was left to navigate an empty universe, devoid of ultimate meaning or direction. This absence of inherent meaning doesn't just apply to grand questions about existence, it permeates the minutiae of life. The work we do, the relationships we form, the goals we chase, none of these have intrinsic value beyond what we assign to them. To the existential nihilist, this is not a matter of pessimism or despair. It is a reflection of reality. The universe operates according to its own indifferent laws, and any meaning we find in life is purely a human construction. Jean-Paul Sartre, an existentialist philosopher often associated with nihilistic ideas, offered a unique perspective on this void. He argued that the lack of inherent meaning in life is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be accepted. Sartre believed that human beings are condemned to be free, meaning that in the absence of a predetermined purpose, we have the ultimate responsibility to create our own values and meaning. This freedom, while exhilarating, is also deeply unsettling. It places the burden of defining our lives squarely on our shoulders, with no external guide to follow. For many, existential nihilism evokes a sense of despair. If life has no objective meaning, why bother with anything at all? This question has haunted humanity for centuries, giving rise to what is often called the existential crisis, a profound confrontation with the emptiness of existence. But not all who grapple with nihilism succumb to despair. Some find a strange liberation in acknowledging life's lack of inherent purpose. By rejecting imposed meanings, they feel free to live authentically, without the weight of societal expectations or the need to conform to arbitrary standards. This freedom, however, comes with its challenges. Without a universal framework, how do we determine what is good or bad, worthwhile or wasteful? Nihilism doesn't provide clear answers. It doesn't tell us how to live or what to value. Instead, it forces us to confront our own capacity for meaning-making. For some, this leads to a deeper appreciation of life's fleeting moments. A sunset, a shared laugh, a quiet walk, precisely because they are temporary and unbound by cosmic significance. Critics of existential nihilism often accuse it of being overly bleak, even destructive. They argue that a worldview devoid of meaning can lead to apathy, selfishness, or moral chaos. Yet many philosophers and artists have used nihilism as a starting point for profound creativity and insight. Fyodor Dostoevsky's novel The Brothers Karamazov explores the moral implications of a world without God, asking whether humanity can maintain morality without divine authority. Albert Camus, while not strictly a nihilist, engaged with similar themes in his concept of the absurd, the tension between our desire for meaning and the universe's indifference. Camus famously asked whether life is worth living in the face of this absurdity. His answer was not to abandon life, but to embrace its contradictions. In works like The Myth of Sisyphus, he argued that we must imagine Sisyphus condemned to endlessly roll a boulder up a hill as happy. The act of living, of continuing despite the lack of ultimate meaning, becomes an act of rebellion against the void. Existential nihilism doesn't offer solutions or solace. It doesn't promise a brighter future or a hidden truth waiting to be discovered. Instead, it strips away illusions, challenging us to confront the stark reality of existence and decide what to do with it. For some, this confrontation is paralyzing. For others, it is a call to create, to act, and to live as fully as possible in the face of life's impermanence. In the end, existential nihilism leaves us with a paradox. By denying inherent meaning, it forces us to recognize the immense power we have to shape our own lives. The absence of cosmic purpose doesn't negate the value of existence. It shifts the focus to the here and now, to the choices we make and the relationships we form. It is both a burden and a gift, a reminder that while the universe may be indifferent, our lives are ours to define. The meaning of suffering. Suffering is inevitable. It touches every life in every corner of the world, leaving no one untouched. But why does it exist? Is it merely a cruel accident of life, or does it serve a deeper purpose? The question of the meaning of suffering has haunted humanity for millennia, inspiring some of our most profound philosophies, religions, and works of art. At its core, suffering raises questions about existence itself. Why must living beings endure pain, loss, and despair? For many, suffering seems to undermine the very idea of a just or meaningful universe. And yet some argue that suffering is not just an unfortunate byproduct of existence, but a force that shapes us, challenges us, and paradoxically gives life depth and meaning. One of the most influential perspectives on suffering comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who saw pain as an unavoidable part of the human experience. He argued that understanding the nature of suffering could help us manage it. For Epicurus, much of our suffering comes from fear of death, fear of pain, fear of the unknown. By confronting these fears head-on and recognizing their limits, we can reduce the hold they have over us. This isn't to say we eliminate suffering entirely, but we learn to navigate it with greater clarity. Religious traditions also provide powerful interpretations of suffering. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as a test of faith or a path to redemption. The story of Job, for example, explores the endurance of a man who loses everything yet continues to trust in God. Through his trials, Job's suffering becomes a means of deepening his relationship with the divine, even if the reasons for his pain remain incomprehensible. This perspective doesn't necessarily explain suffering, but it reframes it as something that can transform and elevate the human spirit. In Buddhism, suffering is placed at the center of its teachings. The First Noble Truth states that life is marked by suffering, or dukkha, caused by desire and attachment. This suffering is not seen as punishment, but as a natural consequence of craving permanence in an impermanent world. The Buddha's path to enlightenment offers a way to transcend suffering, not by avoiding it, but by understanding its roots and learning to let go. This approach views suffering as a teacher, guiding us toward insight and liberation. For existentialist philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, suffering is an essential part of growth and self-discovery. Nietzsche famously declared, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." He believed that suffering was not to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and creativity. Life's greatest challenges, he argued, force us to confront our limitations and push beyond them, transforming pain into power. To Nietzsche, suffering was not just a condition to endure, but a force that could fuel human greatness. But not everyone agrees that suffering has meaning. For many nihilists, suffering is simply a fact of life, random, meaningless, and indifferent. It has no deeper purpose, no cosmic justification. This perspective can be both freeing and unsettling. On the one hand, it absolves us of the need to find meaning in our pain. On the other, it leaves us with the daunting task of facing suffering without the comfort of larger narratives. Nihilism challenges us to create our own meaning in a universe that offers none. Modern psychology offers yet another perspective, focusing on how humans process and respond to suffering. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote extensively about the meaning of suffering in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Drawing on his experiences in concentration camps, Frankl argued that while we cannot always control the suffering we endure, we can choose how we respond to it. For Frankl, the ability to find meaning even in the darkest circumstances is what defines humanity. He saw suffering as an opportunity to rise above our circumstances and affirm the value of life. Science, too, sheds light on the nature of suffering, particularly its role in evolution. Pain serves as a survival mechanism, warning us of danger and helping us avoid harm. Emotional suffering, such as grief or loneliness, strengthens social bonds and promotes cooperation, which are essential for the survival of social species. While these explanations don't offer moral or philosophical meaning, they reveal suffering as an integral part of life's design, shaping the way we interact with the world and each other. In the modern world, where suffering often feels overwhelming, wars, pandemics, environmental crises, it's easy to see it as an insurmountable burden. Yet some argue that suffering can inspire acts of compassion and solidarity. In moments of collective hardship, people often come together to support one another, finding strength and meaning in shared humanity. This doesn't erase the pain, but transforms it into something that connects and uplifts. Suffering forces us to ask difficult questions. It challenges our assumptions, tests our resilience, and compels us to confront the fragility of life. Whether we find meaning in it or not, suffering remains one of the most profound and universal aspects of existence. It is a mirror reflecting our vulnerability and a crucible in which our character is forged. Ultimately, the meaning of suffering is deeply personal. For some, it is a source of spiritual growth. For others, it is a reminder of life's harsh indifference. And for many, it is simply an undeniable fact of existence that must be faced and endured. What unites all these perspectives is the recognition that suffering, though painful, is an integral part of being alive. In understanding it, we come closer to understanding ourselves and the complex, fragile, and extraordinary experience of life. The absurd. Life demands meaning, but the universe refuses to provide it. This is the heart of the absurd, a concept explored by the French philosopher Albert Camus. It describes the fundamental conflict between our human need to find purpose and the universe's cold indifference. The absurd is not a problem to be solved or a puzzle to be unraveled. It is a condition of existence that we must learn to live with. Camus believed that by confronting the absurd directly, we could find a unique form of freedom and joy. The absurd arises from our unrelenting search for answers. As humans, we crave explanations for why we exist, why we suffer, and what it all means. We turn to religion, philosophy, science, and art to satisfy this hunger. But no matter how hard we look, the universe remains silent. It offers no ultimate answers, no grand purpose, and no comforting design. This silence can feel like a betrayal, as though the universe is withholding something we are entitled to. Yet, Camus argues, this tension between our need for meaning and the universe's indifference is not a failure of existence. It is simply the way things are. The absurd is not just a theoretical idea, it is something we encounter in everyday life. Imagine working tirelessly toward a goal only to realize that it doesn't bring the satisfaction you expected. Or consider the repetition of daily routines, waking up, eating, working, sleeping, and doing it all over again. These moments expose the gap between our expectations and reality, between the meaning we seek and the emptiness we often find. The absurd reveals itself in these moments, not as a dramatic revelation, but as an unsettling reminder of life's contradictions. For Camus, the absurd is not something to escape or overcome. It is a reality to be confronted head-on. Many people, when faced with the absurd, attempt to resolve it through what Camus called philosophical. This occurs when someone abandons their quest for meaning by embracing a pre-packaged answer, such as religious faith or ideological dogma. By doing so, they surrender their freedom and reject the very tension that makes life interesting. Camus rejected this approach, insisting that the absurd must not be denied or ignored. The absurd also raises the question of whether life is worth living. If there is no ultimate purpose, why bother with existence at all? Camus called this the only serious philosophical question. His response was not resignation or despair, but defiance. He argued that the absence of meaning does not diminish the value of life. Instead, it gives us the freedom to create our own meaning. By accepting the absurd, we can live authentically, embracing the fleeting beauty and chaos of life without pretending it must serve a higher purpose. Camus used the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate his philosophy of the absurd. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus is condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only for it to roll back down each time he nears the top. This endless repetition could easily be seen as a metaphor for futility and despair. But Camus reimagined Sisyphus as a figure of rebellion and strength. He argued that Sisyphus's task is no different from our own. We, too, face struggles that seem pointless in a universe without inherent meaning. Yet, by embracing his fate and continuing to push the boulder, Sisyphus asserts his freedom and defies the absurd. Camus concluded his essay by declaring, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." This vision of happiness is not about denial or false hope. It is about finding joy in the act of living itself, even when life offers no guarantees. The absurd reminds us that our lives are ours to shape. Without a cosmic plan to follow, we are free to pursue what brings us fulfillment, whether that is love, creativity, or the simple pleasure of being alive. In this sense, the absurd is not a curse, but an opportunity to live fully and honestly. Camus's philosophy of the absurd also challenges traditional ideas of success and failure. In a meaningless universe, external measures of achievement lose their significance. What matters is not whether we accomplish great things or leave a lasting legacy, but whether we engage with life authentically and courageously. This perspective liberates us from the pressure to conform to societal expectations or chase goals that do not truly resonate with us. The absurd is not an easy philosophy to embrace. It requires us to let go of comforting illusions and face the world as it is. But in doing so, it offers a profound form of freedom. It teaches us to stop searching for answers that do not exist and instead focus on the experience of living. The absurd reminds us that life's meaning is not something we find, it is something we create. In the end, the absurd is both a challenge and a gift. It asks us to confront the contradictions of existence without flinching, to live with uncertainty and still find joy. Camus believed that this acceptance of the absurd was the ultimate act of rebellion, a refusal to be defeated by life's lack of meaning. By embracing the absurd, we reclaim our freedom and discover a happiness that is uniquely our own. Life, for all its strangeness and struggle, becomes an adventure worth living. Life is a cosmic accident. Life wasn't planned, it wasn't designed, it wasn't inevitable. It's the result of a cosmic accident, an extraordinary chain of events in an indifferent universe that just happened to align in the right way. From the formation of the first atoms to the emergence of consciousness, every step of life's journey is marked by randomness and improbability. The question is, what does this realization mean for how we see ourselves, our purpose, and the nature of existence itself? To understand life as a cosmic accident, we have to look at its origins. Around 13.8 billion years ago, the Big Bang marked the beginning of the universe. From an unimaginably small and hot point, space, time, and matter began to unfold. In these early moments, chaos reigned. Particles collided, energy flowed, and over time, atoms formed. Eventually, gravity began to pull these atoms together, creating stars and galaxies. This process was not directed or purposeful. It was driven by the laws of physics and the blind forces of nature. Within the swirling chaos of the universe, one star, a relatively ordinary star in a relatively ordinary galaxy, formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Around it, debris left over from its creation coalesced into planets. On one of these planets, Earth, a unique set of conditions came together: a stable orbit, a protective atmosphere, and a temperature range that allowed liquid water to exist. Again, there was no intention behind this. It was a convergence of chance and physics, a cosmic lottery that Earth happened to win. Life began in the oceans, likely as simple organic molecules formed and interacted under specific conditions. These molecules eventually gave rise to self-replicating structures, the first primitive forms of life. From there, evolution took over, a process that itself is based on randomness. Mutations occur by chance, and only those that offer some survival advantage persist. Over billions of years, this process led to the incredible diversity of life we see today, including us, conscious beings capable of reflecting on our own existence. But here's the catch: none of this had to happen. If the Big Bang had been slightly different, if the Earth's orbit were slightly closer to or farther from the Sun, if a single mutation in our evolutionary history hadn't occurred, we wouldn't be here. The conditions that allowed for life, and especially intelligent life, are so improbable that they can feel almost miraculous. Yet there is no evidence to suggest that any guiding force or higher purpose was involved. It's all the result of natural processes and countless coincidences. This realization can be both awe-inspiring and unsettling. On the one hand, it underscores how extraordinary our existence is. The odds of life arising, let alone intelligent life, capable of contemplating its own origins, are astronomically low. On the other hand, it suggests that we are not central to the universe's story. The cosmos existed for billions of years before us and will continue for billions more after we're gone. Our lives, our struggles, and even our civilizations are fleeting in the grand scheme of things. For some, this perspective raises questions about meaning. If life is an accident, does that mean it's meaningless? If the universe is indifferent to our existence, does that make everything we do pointless? These are deeply personal questions, and different thinkers have approached them in different ways. For existentialist philosophers, the absence of inherent meaning is not a problem, but an opportunity. They argue that meaning is something we create, not something we are given. The fact that life has no predetermined purpose frees us to define our own. Scientists, too, find inspiration in the accidental nature of life. Rather than diminishing its value, the randomness of existence highlights how remarkable it is. Carl Sagan, for example, famously described humans as star stuff, emphasizing that the elements in our bodies were forged in the hearts of dying stars. For Sagan, this connection to the cosmos was a source of wonder and humility. It reminded us that while we may be small, we are also deeply tied to the universe that created us. Life as a cosmic accident also challenges us to rethink our relationship with the world around us. If we are the result of chance, so is every other living thing. This perspective can foster a sense of kinship with all forms of life, from the tiniest microbe to the largest whale. It reminds us that we are not separate from nature, but a part of it, a fleeting expression of the same processes that created the stars and galaxies. At the same time, this view can make us more aware of our responsibility. Life on Earth is fragile, and its continued existence depends on choices we make as a species. Understanding how improbable and precious life is can motivate us to protect it, not because of any higher purpose, but because we recognize its intrinsic value. Ultimately, seeing life as a cosmic accident invites us to embrace uncertainty. It asks us to let go of the idea that the universe owes us answers or guarantees. Instead, it challenges us to find beauty and meaning in the randomness of existence. Our lives may not have been planned, but they are ours to live. And in a universe indifferent to our presence, the very act of living, of caring, of wondering, becomes a profound expression of what it means to exist. The Hedonistic Treadmill. Happiness always seems just out of reach. We chase new goals, dream of bigger achievements, and tell ourselves that if we only had more money, more success, more love, we'd finally be content. But when we get those things, the satisfaction fades, and the cycle begins again. This endless pursuit is what psychologists call the hedonistic treadmill, a concept that reveals how our search for happiness often keeps us running in place. The hedonistic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation, refers to our tendency to quickly return to a baseline level of happiness, no matter what happens in our lives. When we achieve something we've long desired, a new job, a raise, a relationship, it brings a surge of happiness. But over time, that excitement fades as we adapt to the change. Similarly, negative experiences, like losing a job or going through a breakup, often cause an initial drop in happiness, but we eventually recover and return to our baseline. This cycle isn't just anecdotal, it's backed by research. Studies have shown that even life-altering events, like winning the lottery or experiencing a serious injury, don't have as lasting an impact on happiness as we might expect. People who win millions often find themselves no happier a year later than they were before. Similarly, those who experience setbacks frequently adapt to their new circumstances and find ways to regain their sense of well-being. This doesn't mean that happiness is impossible to achieve, but it does mean that our expectations about what will make us happy are often misguided. We imagine that external changes, wealth, status, possessions, will transform our lives. But the truth is more complicated. As we adapt to new circumstances, what once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary. The dream house becomes just a house. The dream job becomes just work. This adaptation is part of what keeps us on the treadmill, constantly searching for the next thing that might finally bring lasting fulfillment. The hedonistic treadmill is rooted in human evolution. Our ancestors lived in environments where survival depended on continuous effort. Staying alive required constantly seeking food, shelter, and safety, and those who became complacent were less likely to pass on their genes. This drive for more served us well in the past, but in modern society, it often leaves us feeling unsatisfied. No matter how much we achieve or acquire, it never seems to be enough. Understanding the hedonistic treadmill can help us break free from its grip. One important insight is that material wealth and external success have diminishing returns when it comes to happiness. Research shows that while money can improve well-being up to a certain point by meeting basic needs and reducing financial stress, beyond that, its impact on happiness is minimal. After achieving financial stability, accumulating more wealth doesn't significantly increase life satisfaction. Yet many of us continue to chase it, believing it holds the key to happiness. Another way to step off the treadmill is to focus on experiences rather than possessions. Studies suggest that experiences like traveling or spending time with loved ones bring more lasting happiness than material goods. This is partly because experiences create memories and deepen our connections with others, while possessions tend to lose their novelty over time. Investing in relationships, personal growth, and meaningful activities can bring a sense of fulfillment that material success often fails to provide. Gratitude is another powerful tool for countering the effects of hedonic adaptation. By actively appreciating what we already have, we can shift our focus from what's missing to what's present. Practicing gratitude has been shown to increase happiness, reduce stress, and improve relationships. It reminds us that contentment doesn't come from acquiring more, but from valuing what's already in our lives. Mindfulness also plays a key role in breaking free from the hedonistic treadmill. By cultivating awareness of the present moment, we can learn to appreciate the simple pleasures of life without constantly striving for more. Mindfulness helps us recognize when we're caught in the cycle of wanting and reminds us that happiness is not a destination, but a state of being. While the hedonistic treadmill highlights the challenges of maintaining happiness, it also reveals our resilience. Our ability to adapt to both positive and negative experiences is a testament to the human capacity for growth and recovery. Life will always bring ups and downs, but understanding how hedonic adaptation works can help us approach these fluctuations with greater awareness and balance. The hedonistic treadmill doesn't mean we should stop striving or setting goals. Ambition and progress are essential parts of life. But it does challenge us to rethink why we pursue certain things and whether they truly bring the satisfaction we seek. It invites us to step back and ask whether we're running towards something meaningful or simply running in circles. Ultimately, the treadmill isn't about the things we chase. It's about how we engage with life. By shifting our focus from external achievements to internal contentment, we can begin to move away from the endless cycle of striving and toward a deeper, more lasting sense of happiness. The treadmill may be a part of human nature, but with awareness and intention, we can learn to walk at our own pace, savoring the journey instead of endlessly chasing the finish line. Philosophical pessimism. Life is inherently filled with struggle, suffering, and unfulfilled desires. This stark view lies at the core of philosophical pessimism, a school of thought that challenges the optimism often associated with human existence. Philosophical pessimism doesn't aim to depress or discourage, but to confront life's harsh realities with honesty. It invites us to question our assumptions about progress, happiness, and the meaning of life itself. The foundations of philosophical pessimism are often traced back to the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer. For Schopenhauer, the root of human suffering is the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that drives all living beings. This will manifests as endless striving, where every fulfilled desire leads to another, creating a cycle of frustration and fleeting satisfaction. Schopenhauer believed that this relentless striving is not only exhausting, but ultimately futile, as it perpetuates dissatisfaction and suffering. Schopenhauer's view of life as inherently painful extends beyond individual struggles. He argued that suffering is woven into the very fabric of existence, affecting all living beings. Predators hunt prey, illnesses afflict the body, and death looms over every life. While moments of happiness or pleasure exist, they are temporary and often come at the expense of others. Schopenhauer viewed these fleeting joys not as evidence of life's value, but as brief respites in an otherwise grim reality. Another influential voice in philosophical pessimism is Friedrich Nietzsche, who, while often associated with existentialism, also grappled with pessimistic ideas. Nietzsche challenged Schopenhauer's resignation to life's suffering by proposing a philosophy of affirmation. He acknowledged the harshness of existence, but argued that we must embrace life's struggles and chaos as essential parts of being alive. For Nietzsche, the recognition of life's difficulties doesn't demand despair. It calls for a reevaluation of how we confront and interpret those difficulties. Philosophical pessimism also finds resonance in the works of Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran, who took a deeply personal approach to the theme of suffering. Cioran's writing is filled with reflections on the absurdity of existence, the inevitability of death, and the fragility of human aspirations. He described life as a continuous struggle against despair, where moments of clarity often reveal the emptiness beneath our pursuits. For Cioran, pessimism wasn't a philosophy to solve, but a lens through which to see life more clearly. One of the most compelling aspects of philosophical pessimism is its critique of progress. While many people believe in the idea of continuous improvement, whether through technology, society, or personal growth, philosophical pessimists challenge this narrative. They argue that while circumstances may change, the fundamental nature of human suffering remains constant. Technological advancements might alleviate certain hardships, but they often create new forms of discontent. Similarly, societal progress may improve living conditions, but it cannot eliminate existential suffering or the limitations of mortality. Philosophical pessimism also questions the pursuit of happiness as a primary goal. It suggests that the relentless focus on achieving happiness often leads to greater disappointment, as happiness is elusive and transient. Instead of chasing an idealized state of contentment, pessimists encourage us to accept the imperfections and limitations of life. This acceptance doesn't mean giving up, but learning to navigate existence without the constant pressure to find ultimate fulfillment. One way philosophical pessimism offers solace is by emphasizing solidarity in suffering. By recognizing that pain and struggle are universal experiences, pessimism fosters a sense of connection and compassion. If suffering is an inevitable part of life, then our shared vulnerability can be a source of empathy and understanding. This perspective encourages us to care for one another, not because life is perfect, but because we are all navigating its challenges together. Philosophical pessimism also provides a counterbalance to overly simplistic or idealistic views of life. In a world that often glorifies positivity and success, pessimism serves as a reminder that struggle is a natural and valid part of existence. It allows us to approach life with a sense of realism, acknowledging its difficulties without being consumed by them. In this way, pessimism can be a grounding force, helping us maintain perspective in the face of hardship. Critics of philosophical pessimism often accuse it of being defeatist or overly negative. They argue that focusing on life's struggles risks ignoring its beauty, joy, and potential. However, many pessimists would disagree with this characterization. They don't deny that beauty and joy exist. They simply refuse to ignore the suffering that accompanies them. For pessimists, acknowledging the full spectrum of human experience, including its darker aspects, is essential to understanding and appreciating life. Philosophical pessimism doesn't provide easy answers or comforting illusions. It doesn't promise a better future or a hidden purpose behind life's struggles. Instead, it challenges us to confront existence as it is, without sugarcoating or avoidance. This confrontation, while difficult, can also be liberating. By letting go of unrealistic expectations, we can engage with life on its own terms, finding meaning in the act of living itself. Ultimately, philosophical pessimism is not a philosophy of despair, but one of honesty. It asks us to look at life without flinching, to acknowledge its hardships without turning away. In doing so, it offers a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, a mix of pain, joy, hope, and doubt, all bound together in the complex, unrelenting experience of existence. Eco-philosophy. Humanity has built a world that often forgets its roots. Cities rise, resources are extracted, and ecosystems are reshaped, all to serve human needs. But at what cost? Eco-philosophy and deep ecology challenge this way of thinking, urging us to reconsider our relationship with the natural world. They confront the assumption that humans are the center of existence, placing all life forms and ecosystems on equal footing. Eco-philosophy is a broad field that explores the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical dimensions of the environment. It's not just about preserving nature, it's about rethinking how we perceive and interact with the world around us. It challenges the anthropocentric mindset, the belief that humans are superior to other life forms and that nature exists solely for our use. Instead, eco-philosophy proposes a holistic view of life, where humans are seen as one part of a vast, interconnected web. One of the most influential movements within eco-philosophy is deep ecology, a term coined by Norwegian philosopher Arne Næss in the 1970s. Deep ecology goes beyond the surface-level concerns of traditional environmentalism, such as pollution and resource management. While these issues are important, deep ecology argues that they treat symptoms rather than addressing the root cause of environmental degradation: humanity's flawed relationship with nature. Deep ecology asks us to shift from a shallow utilitarian view of the environment to a deeper understanding of the intrinsic value of all living beings. Under this framework, a tree is not valuable because it provides wood or absorbs carbon dioxide. It is valuable simply because it exists. This perspective challenges the exploitative mindset that has driven much of human progress, inviting us to see the natural world as a community to which we belong rather than a resource to be used. At the heart of deep ecology is the principle of biocentric equality, the idea that all living things have an equal right to live and flourish. This doesn't mean humans should abandon their needs or desires, but it does call for a radical reevaluation of our priorities. It asks us to consider the impact of our actions on the entire web of life, not just on ourselves. By recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, deep ecology seeks to foster a sense of humility and responsibility. The implications of deep ecology are profound. It challenges the economic systems that prioritize growth and consumption over ecological balance. It questions the narratives of human exceptionalism that have justified the destruction of habitats and species. And it calls for a transformation in how we approach everything from agriculture to energy production, emphasizing sustainability and coexistence over exploitation. Philosophers and activists within the deep ecology movement often highlight the spiritual dimensions of this perspective. They argue that reconnecting with nature is not just an ecological necessity, but a path to personal and collective well-being. Many indigenous traditions, for example, have long embraced the idea that humans are part of a larger natural order with responsibilities to the land and its inhabitants. Deep ecology draws inspiration from these worldviews, seeking to integrate them into modern environmental thought. Critics of deep ecology sometimes argue that its principles are too idealistic or impractical in a world driven by economic and political interests. They question whether humanity can truly prioritize the needs of ecosystems over its own short-term goals. Others worry that deep ecology's emphasis on biocentric equality could lead to difficult ethical dilemmas, such as how to balance human survival with the protection of other species. These criticisms highlight the tension between deep ecology's vision and the realities of human society. Despite these challenges, deep ecology offers a powerful lens through which to view the environmental crises of our time. It reminds us that the destruction of ecosystems is not just an environmental issue, it is a moral and philosophical failure. By treating nature as a commodity, we undermine the very systems that sustain life. Deep ecology invites us to imagine a different future, one where humanity lives in harmony with the earth, respecting its limits and celebrating its diversity. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology also provide practical guidance for individuals and communities. They encourage local, sustainable practices that reduce harm to the environment. They promote education and awareness about the interdependence of life. And they inspire grassroots movements that challenge the systems and policies driving ecological destruction. These efforts may not solve every problem, but they represent a crucial step toward aligning human activities with the principles of deep ecology. Perhaps the most radical aspect of eco-philosophy and deep ecology is their call for a shift in consciousness. They ask us to move beyond seeing nature as something separate from ourselves and instead recognize that we are deeply embedded within it. This shift is not easy. It requires confronting long-held beliefs, rethinking our values, and accepting that humanity is not the pinnacle of life, but one part of a larger whole. In a world facing climate change, biodiversity loss, and resource depletion, the ideas of eco-philosophy and deep ecology are more relevant than ever. They challenge us to look beyond immediate solutions and address the deeper issues at the heart of the environmental crisis. They remind us that the health of the planet is inseparable from our own well-being, and that by caring for the Earth, we are ultimately caring for ourselves. Eco-philosophy and deep ecology may not offer quick fixes, but they provide a vision of what is possible, a world where humanity learns to live within its means, respects the rights of all beings, and finds meaning not in domination, but in connection. This vision is both a challenge and an invitation, calling us to rethink what it means to be human in a world that is infinitely larger and more complex than ourselves. Existential loneliness. No matter how connected we are, how deeply we love, or how closely we bond, there is a part of us that remains fundamentally alone. This is existential loneliness, the deep, pervasive sense of solitude that stems not from the absence of others, but from the nature of existence itself. It is the recognition that, as individuals, we are ultimately isolated in our inner experiences, carrying the weight of our existence alone. Existential loneliness is not about being physically alone. It's not the same as social isolation or the temporary feeling of missing someone. Instead, it's rooted in the realization that no one can fully understand or share the entirety of another person's inner world. No matter how well we articulate our thoughts or how closely we connect with someone, our subjective experiences remain uniquely ours. This inherent separateness is a condition of being human. Philosophers and writers have long grappled with this profound sense of isolation. Søren Kierkegaard, often regarded as the father of existentialism, spoke of the individual's relationship to existence as a solitary journey. He believed that confronting this solitude was essential for personal growth and authenticity. For Kierkegaard, the individual must face the truth of their aloneness to live a meaningful and authentic life. In this sense, existential loneliness is not just a burden. It is also a call to engage with oneself deeply and honestly. Friedrich Nietzsche explored a similar idea through his concept of the Übermensch, or overman. He saw the journey toward self-realization as inherently solitary, requiring individuals to transcend societal norms and find their own values. For Nietzsche, existential loneliness was a necessary part of this process. It was not something to be avoided, but embraced as a source of strength and individuality. The loneliness of standing apart from the crowd, of forging one's own path, was central to his vision of a fulfilled life. Existential loneliness is also tied to our awareness of mortality. As conscious beings, we understand that our lives are finite, and no one else can share the experience of our death. This knowledge creates a profound sense of solitude as we realize that we alone must face the uncertainty of what lies beyond. For Martin Heidegger, this awareness of mortality was central to the human condition. He described the concept of being toward death, emphasizing that the inevitability of death shapes how we live and how we confront our own existence. Existential loneliness in this context is inescapable. It is woven into our awareness of life's fragility. At the same time, existential loneliness can be a source of creativity and insight. Writers, artists, and thinkers have often drawn on their experiences of isolation to create works that resonate deeply with others. Franz Kafka's writings, for instance, reflect a profound sense of alienation and solitude, yet they speak to universal feelings of disconnection. This paradox highlights one of the unique aspects of existential loneliness. While it is deeply personal, it is also a shared human experience. In acknowledging our isolation, we find a strange form of connection with others who feel the same. Existential loneliness also raises questions about the nature of relationships. Can we ever truly know another person, or are our connections ultimately limited by the boundaries of our own subjectivity? Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension in his existential philosophy, particularly in his play No Exit. He argued that while we crave connection, we often misunderstand or objectify others in our attempts to bridge the gap between ourselves and them. For Sartre, the struggle to connect authentically is an inevitable part of the human condition. Yet, existential loneliness is not necessarily something to overcome or fix. Many existentialists see it as an opportunity to confront the deeper truths of life. By acknowledging our aloneness, we are forced to grapple with questions of meaning, purpose, and identity on our own terms. This can be a source of anxiety, but it can also lead to profound self-discovery and growth. In this way, existential loneliness is both a challenge and a gift. It pushes us to seek understanding and authenticity in a world that often feels disconnected. Modern psychology has also explored the impact of existential loneliness on mental health and well-being. Some researchers argue that acknowledging and accepting this form of loneliness can be a pathway to resilience and self-acceptance. By understanding that existential loneliness is a natural part of life, we can move away from feelings of inadequacy or despair and focus on building meaningful connections with others. These connections may not erase our loneliness, but they can provide comfort and a sense of shared humanity. Existential loneliness is a reminder of both the limits and the richness of human experience. It forces us to face the fact that no one else can live our lives for us, think our thoughts, or feel our feelings. But it also reminds us of the value of connection, empathy, and understanding. While we may never fully bridge the gap between ourselves and others, the attempt to do so is what makes relationships meaningful. In the end, existential loneliness is neither entirely good nor entirely bad. It is simply part of what it means to be human. It challenges us to look inward, to confront our fears and uncertainties, and to find our own paths in a complex and often confusing world. By embracing our aloneness, we can learn to live with greater authenticity and openness, finding meaning not in escaping loneliness, but in facing it with courage and compassion. Misanthropy in philosophy. Humanity is flawed, perhaps so flawed that some philosophers have questioned whether it deserves its place in the world. Misanthropy, or the distrust and critique of humanity, has long been a theme in philosophy, challenging our understanding of ourselves, our values, and our impact on the world. It is not about hating individual people, but about questioning the collective nature of humanity, its tendencies, choices, and the consequences of its actions. Philosophical misanthropy is not simply cynicism or bitterness. It is a serious critique of human nature. It examines the ways in which humanity falls short of its ideals, often focusing on the harm we inflict on ourselves, others, and the planet. For thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer, misanthropy stemmed from a deep skepticism about human behavior. Schopenhauer saw humanity as driven by the will to live, a blind, insatiable force that leads to constant striving, competition, and suffering. He argued that human beings, far from being rational or virtuous, are largely governed by selfishness and irrational desires. Friedrich Nietzsche, another pivotal figure, approached misanthropy differently. While Nietzsche criticized humanity for its herd mentality and its tendency to cling to comfort and mediocrity, he did not reject humanity outright. Instead, he saw these flaws as challenges to overcome. Nietzsche's misanthropy was not a dismissal of humanity, but a call for transformation, a demand that we confront our limitations and strive to become better versions of ourselves. Philosophical misanthropy often emerges from a sense of disappointment. The ancient Greek philosopher Diogenes of Sinope, a key figure in cynicism, is remembered for his sharp critiques of human hypocrisy and vanity. He is said to have wandered the streets with a lantern, searching for an honest man. Diogenes rejected the social conventions and materialism of his time, believing that humanity's pursuit of wealth, power, and status had corrupted its moral character. His misanthropy wasn't rooted in hatred, but in frustration with humanity's failure to live authentically and virtuously. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a more hopeful thinker, also expressed misanthropic ideas in his critique of civilization. Rousseau believed that humanity was inherently good in its natural state, but had been corrupted by society. He argued that the pursuit of progress and modernity had alienated people from their true nature, leading to inequality, greed, and moral decay. While Rousseau's misanthropy was directed at the collective flaws of civilization, it carried an underlying belief in the possibility of redemption through a return to simplicity and connection with nature. Modern misanthropic philosophy often focuses on humanity's impact on the planet. Environmental philosophers like Arne Naess and thinkers associated with the deep ecology movement argue that humanity's exploitation of nature reflects a dangerous anthropocentrism. This perspective sees humanity as a destructive force, prioritizing its own interests at the expense of other species and ecosystems. While not all environmentalists are misanthropes, this critique of humanity's role in ecological crises aligns with misanthropy's broader distrust of human behavior. Misanthropy can also take an existential turn, questioning whether humanity's existence has any inherent value. Émile Cioran, a 20th-century philosopher, wrote extensively about the absurdity and futility of human life. For Cioran, humanity's relentless pursuit of meaning often masked its deeper flaws, its arrogance, destructiveness, and inability to confront its limitations. Yet Cioran's work also reveals a dark humor and a recognition of the resilience and contradictions of the human condition. Critics of philosophical misanthropy often argue that it is overly harsh or dismissive of humanity's potential. They point to acts of kindness, creativity, and progress as evidence that humanity is capable of greatness. While misanthropy highlights humanity's failures, it risks overlooking its capacity for compassion, innovation, and resilience. However, many misanthropic philosophers would counter that their critique is not an absolute condemnation, but an attempt to confront uncomfortable truths. By acknowledging humanity's flaws, they argue, we can begin to address them. One of the most challenging aspects of misanthropy is its moral implications. If humanity is fundamentally flawed, what should we do about it? Should we strive to change, or should we accept our limitations? Philosophers like Nietzsche saw misanthropy as a call to action, urging humanity to overcome its weaknesses and embrace its potential. Others, like Schopenhauer, lean toward resignation, viewing the flaws of humanity as inherent and unchangeable. Philosophical misanthropy forces us to grapple with difficult questions about our nature and our future. Are our flaws a product of circumstance, or are they inherent to who we are? Can we rise above our tendencies toward selfishness, violence, and destruction, or are these traits inseparable from our humanity? These questions are not easy to answer, but they are vital for understanding the human condition. Ultimately, misanthropy in philosophy is not about rejecting humanity, but about holding a mirror to it. It asks us to confront our failures, question our assumptions, and rethink what it means to be human. Whether it leads to despair, hope, or transformation, philosophical misanthropy challenges us to take a hard look at ourselves and consider how we can do better. In doing so, it invites us not to turn away from humanity, but to engage with it more honestly and thoughtfully than ever before. Transhumanism. What if humanity could take control of its own evolution, enhancing our bodies and minds beyond anything nature ever intended? This is the vision of transhumanism, a movement that seeks to use technology to overcome the biological limitations of the human body and redefine what it means to be human. It's not science fiction anymore. Transhumanism is a rapidly growing field of thought, blending philosophy, ethics, and cutting-edge science to imagine a future where humans are no longer bound by aging, disease, or even death. Transhumanism begins with a simple premise. Human beings are not the final stage of evolution. For centuries, we have adapted to our environment through natural selection, but transhumanists argue that we are now in a position to direct our own development. Advances in artificial intelligence, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and neuroscience are making it possible to fundamentally alter the way we live, think, and interact with the world. One of the key goals of transhumanism is to eliminate the physical vulnerabilities of the human body. Aging, for example, is often seen as an inevitable part of life, but transhumanists view it as a problem to be solved. Scientists are already exploring ways to slow, stop, or even reverse the aging process. Through cellular repair, genetic editing, and therapies that target the root causes of aging, the dream of a significantly extended lifespan, or even immortality, is no longer outside the realm of possibility. Disease is another frontier. Modern medicine has already made incredible strides in treating illnesses, but transhumanism envisions a world where diseases like cancer, Alzheimer's, and heart disease are entirely eradicated. Gene editing tools like CRISPR are being used to correct genetic defects and strengthen immunity, while advances in prosthetics and bioengineering are enabling the replacement of damaged organs and tissues with more durable, efficient alternatives. Transhumanism is not just about physical enhancement. It also seeks to expand human intelligence and cognitive capabilities. Brain-computer interfaces, for instance, are being developed to allow direct communication between our minds and machines. This technology could enhance memory, improve problem-solving abilities, and even enable new forms of creativity and expression. Imagine a future where knowledge is instantly accessible, not by looking at a screen, but by directly integrating it into your mind. At its core, transhumanism is a philosophy of improvement, but it raises profound ethical questions. If we enhance human capabilities, who gets access to these technologies? Will they be available to everyone, or will they create a new divide between the enhanced and the unenhanced? Critics worry about a future where wealth determines not just material comfort, but biological advantage, exacerbating existing inequalities and creating a society of technological haves and have-nots. Another ethical concern is the question of identity. As we integrate more technology into our bodies and minds, where do we draw the line between human and machine? If you replace enough parts of yourself with artificial components, are you still you? Transhumanists argue that identity is not tied to biology. It is about consciousness and experience. Yet this view challenges long-held notions of what it means to be human and forces us to reconsider the boundaries of personhood. Transhumanism also ventures into the philosophical territory of purpose and meaning. If we eliminate suffering, extend life indefinitely, and enhance our cognitive abilities, what does life look like? For some, this vision is utopian, offering endless opportunities for growth, exploration, and self-fulfillment. For others, it raises concerns about stagnation, boredom, or a loss of humanity's essential character. If struggle and limitation are integral to the human experience, what happens when those elements are removed? The movement is not without its critics. Some argue that transhumanism's pursuit of perfection overlooks the unintended consequences of altering complex biological systems. Others worry that the focus on enhancement distracts from addressing pressing global issues like poverty, climate change, and political instability. Transhumanists counter that their vision is not about escaping these challenges, but about equipping humanity with the tools to solve them more effectively. One of the most controversial aspects of transhumanism is its potential to transcend death itself. The idea of uploading consciousness into a digital format, a concept often referred to as mind uploading, suggests that we could achieve a kind of immortality by transferring our thoughts, memories, and personalities into machines. While this possibility is still speculative, it raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness. If your mind can be copied into a digital format, is that truly you or just a replica? What happens to the original you? The environmental implications of transhumanism are also significant. Some proponents argue that enhancing human efficiency, such as by reducing the need for food or energy, could help alleviate the strain on the planet's resources. Others point to the risks of technological overreach, where unregulated advancements could lead to unforeseen consequences for ecosystems and biodiversity. Transhumanism ultimately forces us to think about the long-term trajectory of humanity. Are we content to remain as we are, or do we embrace the tools of science and technology to redefine ourselves? It's a question that invites reflection on our values, aspirations, and responsibilities. Transhumanists believe that by pushing the boundaries of what is possible, we can create a future where humanity thrives in ways we can scarcely imagine today. The journey of transhumanism is just beginning, and it promises to be both exhilarating and challenging. It's a vision of humanity not as it is, but as it could become. Whether that future is one of liberation or division, progress or peril, will depend on how we navigate the opportunities and risks of this extraordinary moment in history. The question is not just whether we can enhance humanity, but whether we should, and what kind of future we want to create together. The paradox of freedom. Freedom is the ultimate aspiration of humanity, yet it is often burdened with contradictions. The paradox of freedom lies in the tension between our desire for complete autonomy and the inevitable constraints that make freedom meaningful. It's a concept that has perplexed philosophers, writers, and thinkers throughout history, revealing that freedom is not as simple as it seems. Imagine a world where you could do absolutely anything. No laws, no expectations, no responsibilities. At first, it might sound exhilarating, but it quickly becomes overwhelming. Without structure or boundaries, choices lose their significance. If everything is permissible, nothing feels truly meaningful. This is the paradox. Absolute freedom can feel like no freedom at all. For freedom to matter, it must exist within limits. This paradox becomes clearer when we examine the relationship between freedom and responsibility. To be free is to have choices, but with choices come consequences. True freedom means owning those consequences, yet the weight of responsibility can feel restrictive. The more freedom we have, the more responsibility we bear, creating a delicate balance. For example, when a society grants individuals the freedom to speak and act as they wish, it must also establish systems of accountability to prevent harm. These rules, though they may appear to limit freedom, are what enable it to thrive. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre explored this tension through existentialism, emphasizing the burden of freedom. Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free, meaning that we are forced to confront the full weight of our choices without the comfort of predetermined paths. This absolute freedom can feel paralyzing. If everything is a choice, how do we know what is right or meaningful? Sartre believed that the answer lies in creating our own values, but this process is neither easy nor comforting. Freedom, in this sense, is both empowering and terrifying. Another layer of the paradox emerges when we consider freedom in the context of relationships and society. Humans are inherently social beings, and true freedom cannot exist in isolation. Yet our interactions with others inevitably involve compromise. To live in harmony, we must sometimes limit our own freedom for the sake of others. This tension is evident in debates about laws and governance. While laws restrict individual behavior, they also create the stability necessary for collective freedom. Without laws, society would descend into chaos, where the strong dominate the weak, and true freedom becomes impossible for most. Freedom also interacts with desire in paradoxical ways. When people think of freedom, they often imagine the ability to fulfill their desires without interference. But desires themselves can become a form of bondage. Addiction, obsession, or even the relentless pursuit of success can trap us in cycles of dependency, eroding our sense of autonomy. In this way, unrestrained freedom to follow our impulses can lead to a loss of deeper freedom, the ability to act in alignment with our true selves. This idea is central to the philosophy of Stoicism, which teaches that true freedom comes not from external circumstances, but from mastery over our internal states. By cultivating self-discipline and focusing on what is within our control, we free ourselves from being enslaved by external events or emotions. For the Stoics, freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the ability to navigate them with wisdom and integrity. The paradox of freedom also manifests in the modern world's obsession with choice. We live in an era of unprecedented options, endless career paths, products, and lifestyles. But this abundance of choice can lead to decision fatigue and dissatisfaction. Psychologists have found that too many options often make people feel less satisfied with their choices, as they constantly wonder if a better option was left behind. In this way, the pursuit of unlimited freedom can paradoxically make us feel trapped, uncertain, and unfulfilled. Cultural and historical contexts further complicate the paradox. In many societies, freedom has been framed as liberation from oppression, whether political, economic, or social. Yet, even in the pursuit of liberation, new structures of power and control often emerge. Revolutions that overthrow tyrannical regimes sometimes replace them with equally oppressive systems, revealing that the pursuit of freedom is fraught with unintended consequences. The desire for freedom can lead to its very erosion. On a more personal level, the paradox of freedom plays out in our relationships with ourselves. We often think of freedom as doing whatever we want, but sometimes what we want in the moment conflicts with our long-term goals. Discipline and self-restraint might feel like limitations, but they are often what enable us to achieve meaningful freedom over time. A musician who practices for hours every day may sacrifice leisure, but that discipline allows them the freedom to express themselves fully through their art. Similarly, choosing to adhere to certain principles or commitments can provide a sense of purpose that unrestrained freedom cannot. The paradox also challenges how we view progress. Technological advancements often promise greater freedom to communicate, travel, and access information. Yet these same technologies can become tools of surveillance, distraction, or dependence. Social media, for instance, offers freedom of expression, but can also trap us in echo chambers or addictive behaviors. The tools we create to liberate ourselves can become the very chains that bind us. Ultimately, the paradox of freedom forces us to confront the complexity of human existence. Freedom is not about the absence of constraints, but about finding balance within them. It is about recognizing that boundaries and responsibilities are not the enemies of freedom, but its foundation. True freedom is not infinite choice or unrestrained action. It is the ability to live in alignment with our values, to navigate life's constraints with purpose, and to find meaning in the delicate balance between autonomy and connection. The paradox of freedom is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. It challenges us to think deeply about what we value, how we live, and what it truly means to be free. Far from diminishing freedom, this paradox enriches it, reminding us that the most profound forms of liberty come not from escaping limitations, but from understanding and working within them. The red button thought experiment. Imagine a red button sitting in front of you. Pressing it would instantly and painlessly erase all of humanity. No suffering, no lingering effects, just complete and total cessation of the human race. Now ask yourself, would you press it? This is the red button thought experiment, a simple but profound scenario that forces us to confront deep questions about the value of existence, the nature of suffering, and the moral weight of our choices. The thought experiment begins with the premise that humanity is deeply flawed. Wars, environmental destruction, inequality, and suffering are inescapable parts of our history and present. The person contemplating the button is often asked to consider whether humanity's existence causes more harm than good. Is the world better off with humans, or would the absence of our species alleviate the suffering we cause, both to ourselves and to the planet? The red button offers a radical solution, an end to all human suffering forever. This thought experiment is not about impulsive decision-making. It invites careful reflection on the complexities of human existence. First, it forces us to weigh the value of life itself. Is existence inherently valuable, regardless of the suffering it entails? Some argue that life, even with all its imperfections, is worth preserving because it holds the potential for beauty, love, creativity, and growth. Others counter that these positive aspects of life are outweighed by the pervasive suffering experienced by countless individuals, both human and non-human. To grapple with the red button, one must also consider the nature of suffering. Some philosophers, like Arthur Schopenhauer, have argued that life is primarily a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction, where fleeting moments of happiness are overshadowed by pain and struggle. From this perspective, the red button might seem like an act of mercy, ending the perpetual churn of suffering. However, others see suffering as an intrinsic part of existence, a force that gives depth and meaning to life. Without suffering, would we truly appreciate joy, love, or achievement? Another layer of the thought experiment explores the ethics of making such a decision for humanity as a whole. Even if one believes that pressing the button would eliminate suffering, does anyone have the right to make that choice for billions of people? Humanity is not a monolith. Individuals experience life in vastly different ways. While some endure profound suffering, others find immense value and fulfillment in their lives. The red button reduces this diversity to a binary decision, assuming a single perspective can encapsulate the experience of all. There's also the question of hope. Humanity, despite its flaws, has shown remarkable resilience and capacity for change. Scientific advancements, social progress, and acts of compassion demonstrate that we are capable of addressing our problems and improving the world. Pressing the button would erase not only humanity's suffering, but also its potential. Could we ever justify ending the possibility of a brighter future, even in the face of current hardships? For those who lean toward pressing the button, environmental considerations often play a significant role. Humans have caused immense harm to the planet, driving species to extinction, polluting ecosystems, and altering the climate. Without humanity, the Earth might recover, returning to a state of natural balance. But this raises a further question. Does the planet itself have intrinsic value, independent of human perception? If humanity is gone, who will witness or appreciate the Earth's restoration? And does that matter? The thought experiment also invites us to examine our own biases and emotions. For some, the urge to press the button might stem from personal despair or frustration with humanity's failings. For others, the decision to abstain may be rooted in an instinctive aversion to causing harm, even hypothetically. The red button exposes the tension between reason and emotion, challenging us to think critically about our motivations and values. A compelling twist to the experiment is the possibility that the red button is an illusion, a test designed not to be pressed. In this interpretation, the presence of the button itself is a challenge to humanity's self-awareness and ethical reasoning. By choosing not to press it, we affirm our belief in the worth of existence, despite its imperfections. The button becomes a mirror, reflecting our hopes, fears, and beliefs about what it means to be human. Ultimately, the red button thought experiment is less about the act of pressing or not pressing the button, and more about the questions it raises. It forces us to confront the profound complexity of existence, where suffering and joy, destruction and creation, despair and hope are all intertwined. It challenges us to think deeply about the nature of life, the ethics of choice, and our place in the universe. The thought experiment doesn't provide easy answers, nor is it meant to. Its purpose is to provoke reflection, encouraging us to examine our values and assumptions. In the end, the red button remains unpressed, not because the decision is clear, but because the act of wrestling with its implications is what makes the question so powerful. Through this exploration, we come to understand more about ourselves, our relationship to humanity, and the weight of choices that shape existence itself. Simulation theory. What if everything you know, every moment of joy, every hardship, and every thought exists within a simulation? Simulation theory proposes that our reality might not be the fundamental one, but a creation of advanced beings or systems. It suggests that what we perceive as physical and concrete might be no more real than the worlds inside a video game. The implications are staggering, especially when considering suffering. If our lives are simulated, does suffering hold the same weight? And what does it mean for how we understand pain, ethics, and existence? Simulation theory gained prominence through thinkers like Nick Bostrom, who argued that if advanced civilizations develop the ability to simulate realities indistinguishable from their own, and if they choose to create many such simulations, it becomes statistically likely that we are living in one. While this idea might sound like science fiction, it rests on logical possibilities. The future development of computing power, the motivations of simulated beings, and the indistinguishability of simulated experiences from real ones. If we are indeed living in a simulation, the nature of suffering becomes deeply complicated. In a physical reality, pain and suffering are tied to biological processes, damage to the body, illness, or emotional distress. These experiences carry weight because they are directly connected to survival and well-being. But if our reality is simulated, suffering could be seen as something programmed into our experience. This raises the unsettling question: is suffering necessary in a simulated world, or is it intentionally designed into the system? One possibility is that suffering exists because it adds depth and realism to the simulation. If the beings creating the simulation intended to replicate a reality as close to their own as possible, suffering might be an inescapable part of that design. After all, struggle, loss, and hardship are integral to the human experience, shaping our choices, relationships, and sense of meaning. Without suffering, life might lack the contrast that makes joy and fulfillment meaningful. In this sense, suffering could be viewed as a deliberate feature of the simulation, not a flaw. Another perspective is that suffering, but whether we should, could serve an entirely different purpose, one unknown to us. If we are part of an experiment or a study conducted by the beings who created the simulation, suffering might be a variable they are observing. It could help them understand how simulated beings respond to adversity, or how systems of morality and resilience develop under challenging conditions. In this scenario, our pain might have meaning, but not one we can comprehend within the limits of the simulation. This leads to profound ethical questions about the beings or entities running the simulation. If they have the power to eliminate suffering, are they morally obligated to do so? In human terms, creating a world filled with pain might seem cruel. Yet it's also possible that the creators see the simulation differently, as something akin to art, a learning tool, or a system that transcends human notions of morality. Their perspective might render the concept of cruelty meaningless. The possibility of simulated suffering also forces us to reevaluate our sense of agency. In a simulated world, are our actions and choices truly our own, or are they predetermined by the system? If suffering is pre-programmed, do we have any responsibility for how we experience it or how we alleviate the suffering of others? These questions challenge the foundations of ethics and free will, leaving us to grapple with whether simulated beings can hold moral accountability. For those who find simulation theory plausible, the implications for how we approach suffering in daily life are complex. On one hand, viewing suffering as part of a simulation might diminish its emotional impact. If pain is merely a construct, perhaps it doesn't need to be taken so seriously. On the other hand, the realization that suffering is programmed into the system could deepen its poignancy, as it becomes a reminder of our lack of control over the fundamental nature of our reality. Yet, even within the framework of simulation theory, suffering retains a profound immediacy. Whether real or simulated, pain feels real to the one experiencing it. A broken bone, the loss of a loved one, or the sting of rejection affects us deeply, regardless of whether it arises from biological processes or lines of code. This highlights a paradox of simulation theory. Even if our reality is an illusion, our experiences are not diminished. They remain powerful, vivid, and deeply meaningful to us. Simulation theory also raises the possibility that we are not passive participants, but active creators within the simulation. If we are simulated beings capable of understanding the nature of our reality, could we also influence or reshape it? This idea opens up a hopeful dimension, suggesting that even in a simulated world, we might have the power to confront and reduce suffering through our actions, empathy, and ingenuity. Ultimately, simulation theory forces us to confront fundamental questions about existence and meaning. If our reality is simulated, does that make it less valuable or significant? Or does the very fact that we experience consciousness, joy, and suffering imbue it with its own kind of reality? These questions are not easy to answer, but they remind us that the nature of reality, whether simulated or not, does not diminish the importance of how we live, how we treat others, and how we make sense of our lives. In the end, the possibility that we live in a simulation doesn't provide clear answers about suffering. It does, however, challenge us to rethink our assumptions about reality, agency, and the human experience. Whether our lives are the result of random chance, biological processes, or the design of an advanced civilization, our experiences remain undeniably real to us. Simulation or not, the choices we make in the face of suffering define who we are and shape the world we inhabit.